It started with something small, a glint of light reflecting off an unfamiliar spot in our bedroom. At first I brushed it off, thinking it was just my imagination. Maybe it was the way the sun hit the mirror or the faint shimmer of dust in the air. But once you notice something like that, it's hard to unsee it. Every time I walked into the room, my eyes would drift to that same corner. It wasn't obvious, not something anyone would notice unless they were really looking. And yet it felt deliberate, intentional, like it was meant to be hidden. One evening, I finally gave in to that gnawing curiosity. I stood in the middle of the room, staring at the spot above the wardrobe, trying to piece together why it felt so out of place. Climbing onto a chair, I reached up, brushing my fingers over the wood-grain surface until there it was. A tiny hole, almost invisible, tucked perfectly into a dark groove. My breath hitched as I leaned closer, squinting into the shadowy recess, and then I saw a tiny round lens staring back at me. A camera. For a moment, the air felt thick, suffocating. My chest tightened, and I had to remind myself to breathe. The realization hit me like ice water down my spine. Someone had been watching us, watching me. I froze in place, my mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts. Who put it there? How long had it been there? And what had it seen? The intimacy, the vulnerability, the private moments shared in what was supposed to be the safest, most personal space in our home, it was all tainted now. Violated. I climbed down from the chair, my legs trembling so badly I nearly stumbled. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the camera's hiding spot, as if it might suddenly spring to life and reveal its secrets. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it's not what I think it is. Maybe it's old or broken or something innocent, but there was no denying what I'd seen. That tiny glass lens wasn't there by accident. I picked up my phone, fingers hovering over the screen as I debated what to do next. Should I confront my partner right away? Should I call the police? Should I pretend I hadn't seen it and try to gather more information? Every option felt wrong, every choice carried its own risk. If I said something now, I might lose the chance to understand why, but if I stayed quiet, I'd have to go on pretending everything was fine while that camera continued its silent observation. I decided to check the rest of the room. Slowly, carefully, I moved through the space we shared, our closet, our nightstands, every corner and crevice. My heart pounded with every discovery, even when I found nothing. The paranoia had already taken root. Every shadow, every reflection felt like it was hiding another secret. When I finally sat back down, exhausted and shaking, the weight of the situation began to sink in. This wasn't just about trust, it was about control. Someone had wanted to see me at my most unguarded, my most vulnerable. Someone had crossed a line I didn't even know existed until now. I couldn't stop replaying moments in my head, times when I'd been alone in the room, times when I'd thought I was safe, unobserved. Had the camera been recording? Streaming? Who had access to it? My stomach churned as a horrifying thought crept in. Was it my partner? The idea felt impossible. But was it? Over the past few weeks, there had been moments I'd brushed off, times when their phone would light up with notifications they wouldn't explain, excuses that felt flimsy in hindsight, and those strange, fleeting looks they'd give me when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Were those signs? Were they hints I'd missed? But then again, what if it wasn't them? What if someone else had access to our space? A stranger? A landlord? Maintenance staff? The idea of an unknown face watching me, watching us, sent shivers down my spine. I glanced at the bedroom door, half expecting it to swing open and for someone to burst in, catching me in the act of discovering their secret. But the house was silent. Too silent. The kind of quiet that amplifies every small noise, the creak of floorboards, the faint hum of electricity in the walls. I needed answers, but I couldn't act impulsively. If someone was watching, they'd know if I reacted too strongly. They'd see the fear on my face, the way my hands shook. I had to stay calm, had to act like I hadn't seen anything at all. I stood up and forced myself to walk out of the room casually, as if I were just going to grab a glass of water. But inside, my mind was racing. Every moment spent under the invisible gaze of that camera felt like an intrusion, a violation of something sacred. As I stood in the kitchen, staring blankly at the glass of water in my hands, one thing became clear: nothing in my life was private anymore. and until I could figure out who was behind that camera and why, I would never feel safe again. Once you suspect betrayal, every interaction feels like a trap. It's like a seed planted deep in your mind, growing roots that twist and tighten around every thought, every glance, every word spoken. I couldn't stop thinking about the camera. It haunted me in the quiet moments, in the stillness of night when I should have been asleep. Instead, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering if it was still recording me, watching me. I couldn't bring myself to check again. It felt like acknowledging it would somehow make it worse, make it real all over again. I started watching my partner more closely, analyzing every little thing they did. And once you start looking for signs, you find them everywhere. The late-night messages they'd tilt their phone away to read. The sudden, almost defensive way they'd lock the screen whenever I walked by. The excuses that had felt reasonable before, just a work thing, it's nothing. Don't worry about it now, felt flimsy, rehearsed. I couldn't stop asking myself if those little moments had always been there, or if they were just more obvious now that I was paying attention. And then there were the silences. The pauses in conversation where their smile wouldn't quite reach their eyes, where their voice would falter just slightly. I started questioning everything. Were they being distant, or was I imagining it? Did they always leave the room to take calls, or was that new? Paranoia isn't loud, it's quiet, creeping, invasive. It fills the empty spaces in your mind and makes you second-guess your own reality. I'd find myself staring at them sometimes, watching their face, searching for cracks in the mask they wore. Did they know I'd found the camera? Were they watching me now, not just through the lens but in person, studying my reactions, waiting for me to slip up? I became hyper-aware of every movement, every glance I gave toward the corner of the room where the camera was hidden. I had to act normal, even though every fiber of my being wanted to scream. I couldn't ask them outright. If they were guilty, if they had planted that camera, confronting them might set something in motion I wasn't ready to deal with. And if they weren't guilty, well, the damage would already be done. Trust is a fragile thing, and once it's cracked, it's almost impossible to make it whole again. But the worst part wasn't the suspicion. It was the doubt, the constant push and pull between believing I was right and fearing I was losing my mind. I'd sit alone in the living room, my phone in my hand, debating whether to search for answers or let it go. Should I dig deeper, snoop through their things, check their devices? Or would that make me just as guilty of violating their trust as they were of violating mine? I tried to tell myself I was overthinking it. After all, we'd built a life together. A home. People don't just wake up one day and decide to betray the person they love, right? But then I'd remember the camera cold and unblinking, and the illusion would shatter all over again. There was one night when they came home late. Too late. They walked in with that same tired excuse work ran over. Sorry, I should have texted, and I nodded. Smiled even, but inside I was screaming. I couldn't stop picturing them somewhere else, with someone else. Laughing, sharing secrets, doing things they'd sworn were only for me. And when they leaned down to kiss me, I couldn't help but pull away just slightly. Just enough for them to notice. Everything okay, they asked, their voice soft, concerned. I wanted to tell them the truth. I wanted to scream, no, everything is not okay. There's a camera in our bedroom, and I don't know if you put it there or if someone else did, and I can't trust you and I can't even trust myself anymore, but instead, I forced a smile and said, yeah, I'm fine. Just tired. But I wasn't fine. I was unraveling. In those moments when they weren't home, I'd sit in our bedroom, staring at that corner, wondering who was watching. Were they sitting somewhere right now, feet up, watching me through a screen? Did they laugh when I sat on the edge of the bed, head in my hands, fighting back tears? Did they pause the video when I changed clothes, zooming in, taking screenshots? The thought made me feel sick, violated. Like my body didn't belong to me anymore, like every inch of my life had been reduced to digital data for someone else's amusement. But the most terrifying realization came late one night. I was sitting on the floor, back against the bed, staring at the hidden camera's corner. My partner was in the shower, and the faint sound of running water filled the silence. I wondered if they knew about the camera, and then another thought hit me like a punch to the gut. What if they weren't the one who put it there? Because if it wasn't them, then who was it? And how long had they been watching us? That's when I knew I couldn't keep this secret to myself much longer. Whether it was my partner or someone else entirely, I needed answers. But getting those answers meant taking risks, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what I might find. One sleepless night, I decided to dig deeper. The weight of the camera's presence had become unbearable, a constant reminder that my privacy, our privacy, was nothing more than an illusion. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Every moment in that room felt like standing under a spotlight, stripped bare and vulnerable. My partner was asleep beside me, breathing evenly, blissfully unaware, or so I thought. I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could, heart hammering against my ribcage, and grabbed their tablet from the nightstand. It wasn't locked. Relief flooded me, but it was short-lived. As I swiped through the apps, my stomach twisted into knots. There it was, a nondescript folder tucked between generic apps and standard utilities. It was labeled something innocuous, something meant to be overlooked, but I wasn't about to overlook anything tonight. I tapped it open, and what I found made my blood run cold. There were folders inside. Multiple folders. Each one had a name. Not just mine, not just something tied to us, names of other people, strangers, and a few. A few I recognized. Acquaintances. Friends. People who had been in our home before. My hands shook as I opened one of the folders, the screen filled with thumbnails, images, and videos. Moments stolen from lives that weren't meant to be recorded. It was worse than I had imagined. These weren't just casual, meaningless clips. They were intimate, vulnerable, and they felt deeply, horribly wrong to look at. My eyes skimmed over faces frozen mid-laughter, mid-conversation, mid-private moments they had no idea were being captured. I wanted to stop. I wanted to put the tablet down and pretend I hadn't seen anything. But I couldn't. I kept scrolling folder after folder, video after video, until I found the one labeled with my name. My breath caught in my throat. I hesitated for what felt like an eternity, my finger hovering over the folder. But I had to know. With trembling hands, I tapped it open. There were dozens of files. Videos spanning weeks, maybe months. They were all dated, each one marking a moment in time when I had been completely unaware of the lens capturing me. But it wasn't the sheer volume of them that broke me, it was the most recent file. It was dated yesterday. I clicked on it. There I was, sitting on the edge of the bed, my back turned slightly to the camera. I watched myself on the screen, completely oblivious, my head in my hands. The camera had caught that moment, my moment. A moment of raw vulnerability when I'd been lost in my thoughts, trying to make sense of the chaos unraveling in my mind. And someone had been watching, recording, keeping it. I slammed the tablet shut, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I felt exposed, hollowed out from the inside. It wasn't just the betrayal that crushed me, it was the knowledge that someone, somewhere, had been feeding off my private life, my emotions, my intimacy, as though it was entertainment. But then another thought crept in. These weren't just random clips. They were organized, categorized. Someone had curated this collection. And that meant someone had been watching, not sporadically, not occasionally, but consistently. Deliberately. I gripped the tablet tighter, my knuckles white from the force. My head spun with questions. Why? Why me? Why these other people? Who else knew? And how far did this go? For a moment, I considered waking my partner. I wanted to shove the tablet in their face and scream, demand answers, make them tell me why this existed. But I stopped myself. The reality was simple: either they were involved, or they weren't. And if they were guilty, confronting them now could put me in danger. If they weren't, well, how could I explain what I'd just seen without tearing us apart? I had to be smart about this. I needed to understand the full picture before I made a move. But the images wouldn't leave my head. The faces of strangers, the stolen moments, the way the camera had quietly captured pieces of people's lives without them ever knowing. And then there was me, my face on that screen. My privacy turned into someone else's possession. I felt dirty, violated, like my skin didn't quite fit right anymore. No shower could wash away the feeling, no amount of deep, but buried under the fear, under the disgust, was something else, something sharp and cold and unyielding. It was anger, pure, unfiltered rage. Whoever had done this, whether it was my partner or someone else, they had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I put the tablet back exactly where I'd found it, making sure nothing looked out of place. Then I slipped back into bed, lying rigidly on my side, my back to my partner. Their breathing was steady, peaceful. How could they sleep so soundly while this was happening? I stared into the darkness, my mind racing with everything I'd uncovered. The camera, the folders, the videos. And worst of all, the possibility that this was only the beginning. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't just about me anymore, and I wasn't going to stop until I had answers. The next few days were a blur of uncertainty and fear. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had uncovered, the videos, the stolen moments. My mind kept replaying the images I'd seen, the raw footage of my own life captured without my knowledge. The thought of being watched, of someone having access to my most vulnerable moments, gnawed at me like an itch I couldn't scratch. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just pretend everything was normal. But I also couldn't bring myself to confront my partner. Not yet. I had no proof, no solid evidence that they were behind the camera. What if I was wrong? What if I was Brishan, was just my mind spiraling out of control? The fear of making a mistake, of accusing them without fully understanding what was happening, paralyzed me. So instead, I played the waiting game, trying to gather more clues, trying to piece together the puzzle without tipping my hand too early. Every time I looked at them, I felt a wave of guilt and betrayal. Was I overthinking this? Was I losing my mind, letting paranoia take over? Or had they really been involved in something so cruel, so invasive? There were moments when I couldn't look at them without wondering if they had the same secret I had uncovered. The idea that they might have planted that camera haunted me, filled every room with a heavy tension that I couldn't escape. I started watching them more carefully. I studied their behavior, looking for any sign that would give them away. I noticed the way they would glance at their phone, the way they would make excuses to leave the room. I wondered if they were hiding something. Were they hiding their own guilt, or was I simply imagining it? One night, when they went out for a quick errand, I found myself alone in the bedroom again, my eyes drifting to the corner where the camera was hidden. My breath caught as I stood there, trying to focus. I couldn't ignore it anymore. It felt like the room was closing in on me, suffocating me with the weight of unanswered questions. I had to know more. I had to dig deeper. I decided to search the room once again, this time with a different focus. The last time I had looked, I had been looking for something obvious, a hidden device, a flash of light, anything that would immediately reveal the truth. But this time I had a different goal. I wasn't just looking for the camera. I was looking for any evidence that might point to the person who had put it there. Was there something I had missed? A slip-up, a clue that would lead me to the person behind this? I started by checking the places I hadn't thought to look before: the back of the wardrobe, under the bed, inside the drawers. The more I searched, the more desperate I became. I could feel the anxiety crawling under my skin. Was I going crazy, or was there truly something here that I wasn't seeing? I spent hours combing through the room, trying to stay calm, trying not to let the dread overwhelm me. And then I found something. Hidden under the mattress, tucked away in a small envelope, was a note. At first, I thought it was just a piece of paper that had slipped out from between the sheets, but when I picked it up, I saw that it was carefully folded, almost like it had been placed there deliberately. My heart skipped a beat as I unfolded it, my fingers trembling. The note wasn't long, but its message was clear: I'm watching you. I stared at the words, my mind reeling. It felt like a slap in the face, a direct challenge. It was as though someone was taunting me, daring me to figure out what was really going on. My breath came in short, panicked gasps as I processed what I had just read. This wasn't just about a hidden camera anymore. This was something more personal. Whoever had put the camera there was trying to make a statement. They weren't just recording, they were sending a message. And now they knew I was onto them. I felt a rush of anger flood through me. I had been played, trapped in a web of lies and manipulation. And whoever was behind this wasn't just content with watching from the shadows. They wanted me to know. They wanted to remind me every moment that I was under their control. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces started to fall into place. The note, the camera, the strange distance in my partner's behavior, it all added up, but the fear of confronting the truth kept holding me back. I had no real evidence that my partner was the one behind the camera. No physical proof that they were guilty. But the note felt like a confirmation, a twisted piece of the puzzle that pointed to someone who wanted to remain hidden, wanted to stay in the background and watch as my world crumbled. I couldn't stay in the dark forever. I couldn't let the fear and doubt control me any longer. I had to take action. I had to know the truth. But the truth was something I wasn't sure I was ready for. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how deep this went. Whoever had planted that camera had taken their time, planned it carefully, covered their tracks. The paranoia that had crept into every corner of my life now seemed justified. Every moment, every conversation, every glance, I was being watched. And now I had to figure out who was doing it and why. I stared at the note in my hand, the weight of it settling over me like a heavy cloak. I could feel the room pressing in on me, the walls closing in. The question I had to answer now wasn't whether I could trust my partner. It was whether I could trust myself to make it through this, to face the truth, whatever it might be. Because no matter who was behind this, I knew one thing for sure: my life had already been irrevocably changed. And there was no going back. The day of reckoning finally arrived. My heart was pounding as I sat across from my partner, trying to keep my composure. It felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on me, and every second of silence between us stretched into eternity. I had no idea how I was going to bring this up, how I was going to confront them with everything I had discovered. The camera, the note, the stolen moments of my life. I couldn't stop imagining their reaction. Would they be defensive? Would they deny everything? Or would they admit it and leave me in the ruins of all I had known? I thought about the note. I had found the words "I'm watching you" burning into my mind. It felt like a taunt, a challenge. But it also felt like a cry for help, a desperate cry from someone who had been pushed into the shadows and needed to be seen. The thought of confronting them head-on made my stomach churn, but I knew it was the only way to put an end to this, to find out who was behind it all. "You've been acting distant lately," I finally said, trying to sound casual, though my voice trembled with uncertainty, like you're hiding something. My partner looked up from their phone, a little surprised by the suddenness of the question. "What do you mean?" they asked, their brow furrowing slightly. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I don't know, it just feels like you're always looking over your shoulder, like you're avoiding me." For a brief moment, there was a flicker in their eyes. It was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. I knew they could sense something was off, but whether they knew exactly what I was referring to, I couldn't be sure. They shrugged it off. "I've just been stressed with work. You know how it is." I nodded, trying to keep my cool, but my mind was racing. Stress with work? That was the excuse I had heard so many times before. The same one that didn't add up anymore, now that I knew the truth. The truth I was afraid to face. I couldn't hold back any longer. The words tumbled out in a rush. I found something. A camera. In our bedroom. The air around us seemed to freeze. Their eyes widened, and for a brief moment I saw something flash across their face: fear, panic, guilt. I couldn't tell, but it was enough to make my heart race even faster. "What do you mean, a camera?" they asked, their voice strained, like they were trying to hide something behind the question. I swallowed hard. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. There's a hidden camera in the corner of the room, and I found it. And I found something else. Videos. Of us, of me. Of people I know. I could see the color drain from their face, and for a split second it felt like time stood still. The silence that followed was suffocating, pressing in on me from all sides. I was bracing for an explosion, for them to deny everything, but instead they just stared at me, eyes wide, lips trembling. "Please," they whispered, their voice barely audible. "I can explain." My heart skipped a beat. Was this it? Was this where the truth finally came out? Or was I being played again? My breath caught in my throat as I waited for them to speak. I couldn't decide whether I wanted them to explain themselves or just to tell me the truth. I didn't mean for it to get this far, they said, their words coming out in a rush. I never meant for you to find out. I didn't think you'd ever notice. I could barely process the words. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice cracking. I put the camera there, they admitted, their voice filled with regret. But it wasn't what you think. I wanted to know what was really going on. I needed to know if you were lying to me. I blinked, trying to make sense of what they were saying. What do you mean? Why would you think I was lying? The tension in their shoulders seemed to collapse, and they let out a shaky breath. I'd been feeling paranoid. I thought you were hiding things from me. I thought you were cheating. I couldn't stop thinking about it, so I set up the camera. To watch, to find out the truth. I could barely comprehend what they were saying. I was shaking, my hands trembling as I processed their confession. The camera was never about some other person. It was about me, it was about us. You thought I was cheating, I managed to choke out, my voice a mixture of disbelief and hurt. I don't know, they whispered, their voice barely audible. I just felt like something wasn't right, like you were pulling away, like you weren't really there with me anymore. I couldn't trust you, and I thought if I could just see, if I could catch something. They trailed off, their words hanging in the air like a heavy weight. I was numb. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. Every ounce of trust I had in them shattered in an instant. They hadn't done this because they loved me. They hadn't done this because they cared about our relationship. They had done it because of their own insecurities, their own twisted need to control everything, to catch me in the act of something they had already convinced themselves I was guilty of. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers for every second they had stolen from me. But I couldn't. Instead, I just sat there, staring at them, feeling the room close in around me. The person I had trusted the most had betrayed me in the most painful way imaginable. I didn't mean for it to get this far, they repeated, their voice breaking. I didn't think you'd find out. I thought I could just watch and know for sure. But now it's too late. I stood up abruptly, my legs shaking beneath me. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. I couldn't look at them, couldn't hear their excuses. I needed to get out. I needed to breathe. I turned and walked out of the room, the weight of the betrayal settling over me like a thick, suffocating fog. They called after me, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. There was nothing left to say. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there. Not anymore. I needed space, time, and maybe, just maybe, I needed to find a way to rebuild what had been broken. But for now, all I could do was walk away.